and welcome to our third installment of our Fair Housing Town Hall. This is Mary Beth Yates. I am the Director of Development at Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia, and I am joined today by Regina Cheney, our Community Engagement and Outreach Specialist, and our President and CEO, Heather Crislip. Thank you guys for joining me today.
All right.
We are here to talk about redlining in Richmond and what its impacts are on our community today, why we're still talking about it if it was outlawed in the 60s, and all other good things about one of the hottest topics in housing. So if you have questions as we go today, please feel free to submit them in the chat on whichever platform you are joining us today. And later we will answer as many of those questions as possible. So to kick things off, I thought that I would have Heather remind us again why we're here, why we celebrate Fair Housing Month, and what's going on with us.
Yeah, I always like to start Fair Housing Month events with just a reminder. In April of 1968, Martin Luther King was shot and killed. And just 7 days later, Congress was able to pass the Federal Fair Housing Act. And what that did was outlaw discrimination in any housing or housing-related activity. This was important because Congress had just passed 4 years prior the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was and it prohibited discrimination in public accommodations, in transportation, in education, and a lot of the other areas of public life. But housing in 1964 was just a bit too far. But it really took and his assassination to push the public to the point where they recognized that if we didn't have integrated housing and equal housing opportunities, that we were never going to reach the promised land. So that's why we celebrate April as Fair Month, when both we lost Dr. Martin Luther King, who was at that point making housing one of his largest areas of transformation, but also when Congress was able to really take action and establish the fair housing protections that we enjoy today.
Thank you so much for that, Heather. Regina, I'm going to throw this next question your way. And then, of course, Heather, if you want to chime in, please do. So the first question to kick us off today is, what is redlining? Why are we here and why are we talking about it?
Well, redlining, actually the term came from the activity of banks using a map and actually putting red lines around communities that they would not do business in. And actually that was done by banks, of course, savings and loans, insurance companies, a lot of businesses. And we're here today still talking about it because it still happens. It's still a problem. And part of that is that I believe that some people still believe, separate but equal. Some people aren't comfortable in living with people who don't look like them in a particular community. And of course, some of those people work in these businesses. The mindset is that, property value issues. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, but mainly it's how an industry will actually put lines around certain communities because of who lives there and choose not to provide equal services. What do you think, Heather?
Well, I want to back up and point out that it wasn't banks that came up with this idea. It was the federal government. And
right, okay.
The homeowners loan. No, I mean, its lasting legacy is through was the establishment of the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, in the 1930s that really said, okay, back, and you can go to a great resources called Redlining Richmond at the University of Richmond put together, and actually read the evaluations of neighborhoods. And they were explicitly racist. That is how the government was deciding where they would underwrite mortgages and where they would not. And then your point, Regina, about how that kind of got baked in to business practices. And that's why we insurance practices were all really built on the supports that the federal government put out there for mortgages. And so that's part of its enduring legacy. And what that set up in an African-American community because of these explicitly racist redlining regimes was that certain communities just didn't get equity put into them. And so, public housing ended up being developed in all neighborhoods that had been historically redlined, because once you couldn't get those areas, the values decreased, right? If you can't get a loan for those areas, they're going to be worth less. But also, if you can't get a loan, those neighborhoods are gonna fall short. They're not going to have the level of investment that we had in neighborhoods where you could get a bank loan and could get affordable financing and have access to credit. So system in America, we both have large levels of public investment. White area, not redlined, had access to mortgage underwriting. Black neighborhoods had public housing developed in them. Both of them are supported by our public dollars, but very different outcomes.
Thank you for all that background, Regina and Heather. That's a lot of pretty heavy information to guide us into our topic for today, which is a pretty heavy topic. Heather, can you talk a little bit about how home specifically made history in the late or mid to late 90s about redlining and Richmond specifically? There was a lot of motion then.
Yeah. And I'm going to invite Regina to chime in at any point, because she was actually around when all this was going down and probably has some better insights than I do. But part of the beauty of homes found home ownership.
Heather, I think we lost you there for a second. We heard the founding, and then we lost you.
Around the country that it was they were either denied insurance or it was prohibitively expensive. We're going to show you, so I'll save some of the details to be shown by that. And we're able to demonstrate that indeed that was going on. And we had a number of cases against insurance companies. And this is kind of an example of how of legal redlining to determine their characteristics of what they would continue to, where they would emphasize their products and where they wouldn't. Regina, do you have any good stories about that case in particular? And then I'll talk about the more recent.
Well, I think the best stories, I can just think of was just the outcome, because it was so exciting. And the only stories I know, my own particular story, but it wasn't insurance redlining. It was just, redlining by banks. But in that, the insurance, that particular case, it was long and a lot of hard work. But the outcome was just so joyous, because we were able to prove that this, in fact, was a problem and it existed. It could be done differently. Definitely.
Absolutely. Any last comments before we launch into showing this video that we have queued up?
No, I'll talk about our more recent cases after we've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Then if everybody will give me a little grace while I share my screen. I'm on a one screen computer today. We will get this going.
It's the practice of redlining that has kept Richmond segregated.
The nationwide case became so important at that time because homeownership was the key then. Well, one of the issues is you can't be a homeowner without certain things, and homeowners insurance was one of them.
In the Richmond housing market, it's not that different than the segregation in the housing market of any city. Sadly, there are even governmental policies, and those policies tended to compound racial segregation and isolation of minority communities in Richmond and other areas.
We started getting together with Housing Opportunities Made Equal and other organizations throughout the nation about testing of mortgage insurance companies to see if they were providing insurance in a fair and unbiased, a non-discriminatory manner.
We identified homeowners in areas and communities that we believed were being discriminated against and asked homeowners to participate and train them to be testers.
The two houses that we used were, for insurance purposes, practically identical, except one of them was in a black neighborhood and one of them was in a white neighborhood. Both of the neighborhoods were on the north side of Richmond, and they were very close together.
A series of testers made calls to homeowners insurance agents of many different companies, trying to get a quote on home one and trying to get a quote on home two, the paired house.
The testers were each given a script to follow when they called the insurance agent. And it would be something on the order of, well, I'm buying a new house and I'm going to close in 30 days. Can you give me a quote on homeowners insurance?
The homes were equally beautiful, equally well kept. The neighborhoods were all wonderful. But the difference was the minority composition of that neighborhood.
You go, so what's the difference between this house and this house? And they go, the shutters, the doors, and they look so much alike. The difference is who lived in them.
I got nothing. No, I will be out to see you, no appointment, no nothing from that telephone survey. Basically, you move on. They don't want you. Find someone that does want your money.
The evidence was very powerful that Home put together. There was an assessment that, if you live in this African-American neighborhood, then you're riskier, so we're not going to give you as good a policy and we'll charge you more.
It costs me more as a black man to live the same lifestyle as my white counterpart.
Little did we know that was really just a very tip of the iceberg, because when we got involved in the documents, it showed that this was not an accident in any way, shape, or form.
We were able to go through yellow pages, 1965, 1975, 85, 95, and basically show where Nationwide's agents were located, and then lay that up against the racial demographics of the neighborhoods.
We discovered that over the years, as there was white flight from Richmond, there was also insurance agent flight from Richmond.
They did nothing to reach African Americans, and in fact, did everything not to reach African American neighborhoods. Their local area marketing plan was based upon something called microvision. Microvision was a marketing strategy of zip codes where they divided the neighborhoods based upon categories that they named. You had Caucasian neighborhoods that were called the lap of luxury, established wealth, good family life, the movers and shakers, home sweet home, family ties, a good step forward, great beginnings, country home families, stars and stripes, white picket fence, And then we move into the areas that are closer into the city in greater minority numbers, trying metro times, trying rural times, struggling metro mix, difficult times. Every single time, the minority neighborhoods were excluded. They did not want them. They did not market to them. They did not have agents within the city to talk with them. That was their desire. That was their design.
We had this evidence about Richmond, but suddenly by getting documents from Nationwide, we saw that it was truly a nationwide strategy of focusing energies on predominantly white neighborhoods.
So we felt, wow, this is pretty good evidence. Let's file a lawsuit.
It really was a David and Goliath kind of activity. Here we were, this little organization in Richmond, and we had a very small law firm representing us. And Nationwide and its agents had 4 major law firms, and of course, they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They tried to bury us in documents during discovery, so many documents that they assumed we would never be able to read them all. Thanks to Rhonda and some of our staff, we read everything. When the trial was over and the case went to the jury, it did not take them very long to come back with the verdict.
You have Tim Kane, Tom Wolf, and myself as the trial lawyers. Tom on this side, Tim on this side. We're just holding hands underneath the table, trying to look calm, with our hearts racing. And the jury comes back and says, we won. We were just ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic that the jury got it.
It was amazingly rewarding after all the years that we spent investigating and working on the trial and on the lawsuit, to have the jury agree with us and to know that we were right and that we had made change.
It was the largest civil rights jury verdict that had ever been issued in the history of the United States.
The result of it was that it changed the insurance industry.
After the investigations were over, after the settlement, the CEO came to Home to say that we helped them change their practices, their policies. And so it was really a win-win situation for everybody, for families, for communities, for the insurance industry.
This lesson reverberated throughout the industry and caused a great deal of changes and made it easier for people to get homeowners insurance. Discrimination
is just as prevalent today as it was when we did the nationwide investigation.
Fair housing is still an incredible need. There's still, significant segregation in the nation's housing stock, and that's why a group like Home is as or more important today than it's ever been.
Housing is such an important part of a person's life. It sometimes defines who they are, and to have that blocked or denied because of what you look like is just wrong. But there will always be people who believe that, which is why we will always be here.
That video never gets old.
No, it doesn't. Still holds true. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things, I know you asked the question earlier, Heather, about, that particular case. When I look at the video, what I'm reminded of is the pain that the testers went through at the end. Once the evidence came out, how they felt. And, listen to Sheldon, and I remember some of the other testers who, people of color, and how they felt. It's just such a pain. It really is.
Regina, I know that we've talked about testers in some of our previous videos for this series this month, but can you remind folks what we mean when we say testers?
Right. Well, a tester is a trained individual, trained by Home, a person that is selected to go out and seek housing or seek a service that we are testing about. And the testers are sent based on whatever protected class we're investigating. So if it's a race issue, then we would send a Black tester out or a white tester out, or, you know, some combination to determine if there's differential treatment. So it's sort of like secret shopping to see how people are treated. Basically.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder, Regina.
Mhm.
Heather, did you want to talk about some of the more recent cases that we've been a part of?
Yeah, this is, redlining. We talk about historic redlining, the actual drawing of boundaries and restricting purposefully based on a neighborhood's racial composition. But it also has just leached into business practices. And some of those are not necessarily overtly intentional, but it takes a lot of vigilance to make sure that neighborhoods are being served equally. And in probably about 2015, we did a survey looking at denial disparity rates based on neighborhood for mortgage lending. So whether banks were providing mortgage loans equally between African American and white neighborhoods. And we found some pretty stark denial disparity rates, that Black applicants were being denied at 2 to 3 times the white rate. And that very few conventional home loans were being made in African American neighborhoods. So we continued to investigate that trend and brought some concerns we had directly to Wells Fargo, who is the largest mortgage lender in our region, and it had been underserving African American neighborhoods. And in the end, in 2017, we entered into a partnership agreement that provided about $5 million to Home to do several things. First, a large chunk of that flows through Home to provide down payment assistance for low and moderate income first-time home buyers. So trying to increase the home ownership rate among African Americans. It also provided support for our housing counseling programs. And finally, we've been doing ongoing compliance testing where we use testers with mortgage loan officers to determine and provide that feedback directly to Wells Fargo so that they can do better. So those are some ways, but redlining still in all sorts of ways in our modern housing markets.
Thank you. Regina, anything to add before we jump into some questions that have been submitted?
No, just the effects of redlining. I think it's just really important that people understand how it reduces the incentives to purchase in a particular neighborhood because of the lack of investment. It reduces housing demand and values, and overall, it just perpetuates residential segregation. So,
well, I'm actually going to pause you right there because that is a perfect lead in to our first question. We have somebody who says that they're moving soon. How do they find out about potential neighborhood demographics if it's been a redlined neighborhood, school performance, safety in an equitable way?
Well, I think that first of all, sometimes you're not going to know, if if an area has been redlined unless you have known that community and for some reason you see a change or that there's nothing happening there. Because my experience with neighborhoods that have been redlined is that you see a lot of disrepair. And I've learned certainly over the years and in my own experience that it's not that people don't want to repair their homes and they don't want their houses to look nice. It's that they can't find, financing, or the financing that they can find is too expensive. And so, things just go on, not taken care of. But regarding, how to seek out that information, I know our counselors get that question. And we think that the best thing to do is to ride through a neighborhood that you want to live in and see for yourself, because you can look at demographics somewhere and it depends on where that information came from. It could be, the census or something that is 10 years old. Things may have changed. So we, just to go through it various times to see if it's something that you like or feel comfortable with. As far as school performances, you can Google that and figure out, what's going on, and if the school performs at the rate that at what you're looking for, if it's what you're looking for your children. And as far as safety is concerned, that you can go on the website and look at crime statistics for certain areas. But believe me, crime is everywhere. Because oftentimes in places that you think that it's not, and it doesn't seem like it's there, it's just because it's unreported.
Thank you for that. Heather, do you have anything to add?
Not really on that specific question. I think going to more reliable sources, one of the things we learn about when we talk about segregation is that people do rely on these mental maps. Your grandma told you that that was a place you weren't allowed to go.
Right.
Or like Regina won't go south of the river.
Right. Exactly. That is.
And just challenge those thoughts. Seek out really verifiable information and don't rely on, what your friend told you. Because
Right.
we all perpetuate segregation, we perpetuate inequities by relying on, hearsay from 10 or 20 years ago.
Great. Thank you, Heather. That was a very fantastic point that you just made. Looking at another question, how can someone find out if an area has historically been redlined?
Yeah, there are lots of good resources out there. I mean, historic redlining is pretty well established. It would be looking at the Homeowners Loan Corporation maps. And Redlining Richmond is a great place to see that. I think we have some versions of that on our website. And it's just something to pay attention to, because especially from a policymaker's perspective, investing in areas that we're purposely disinvested in is something we should all be striving to do.
Great. And so Heather just mentioned our website. So that address again is homeofva.org. And we will drop a link to our website here in the chat. Next question, beyond home ownership, how else did redlining affect the quality of neighborhoods?
Take that one, Heather.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you want me to take it? Sorry.
Yes.
I thought you said you'd take it. I was like, good. Yeah, I mean, the availability of credit leaches into when Regina was saying people want to fix up their houses, but they can't get the financing to do it. So if you aren't able to finance your home, or you're not going to be able to sell your home, it was redlining that really fueled white flight. Because people knew that if you had a high area of African Americans, that if suddenly your neighborhood might not be able to be financed, and suddenly it would be worth less. And these were all systemic policy level choices that we made. So once you've been redlining, yeah, you're going to have fewer homeowners. But it also could be that it's the threat of being redlined that drove white folks to be like, well, I don't want that to happen. And it's driven, both by racial animus of your individual feelings, but also by your fear of value in your home. That really was one of the aspects that fueled white flight. So redlining then can make it more difficult to get homeowners insurance, as we just learned. It can make it more difficult, if there's going to be less value in a neighborhood, then amenities aren't going to move in. So it is a trigger that leads to massive, especially over decades, massive underinvestment in communities.
Thank you, Heather. I think we have time for one more question. Regina, before we launch into that last question, did you have anything to chime in there?
No, I was when Heather was talking, I was certainly talking about businesses and the community, and how when there's a lack of investment, there's not much going on. I mean, like grocery stores and so forth. I can in certain communities in Richmond now that have changed, and now we have grocery stores and restaurants, and people have wanted that for years. But once the neighborhood changed, those things or those amenities became available, so.
Absolutely.
Still
all right, so our last last question for today's discussion is going to be from Emily, and she has asked, what about how gentrification is changing the shape of communities that were redlined areas? Housing being flipped because they are seen as more affordable and now pricing out the community who is living there.
That is a very big question. While we seek to rebalance the injustices of redlining and underinvestment, making sure that we have protections and keep people from being displaced. And I think this is a complicated issue. I don't have a pat answer for what this means, because Regina's point is well taken, right? When neighborhoods start to gentrify and you start to see the services come in, it's both like, we've wanted this for years, but at the same time, it can feel threatening. Like, am I going to be displaced? I think that Richmond is making some progress in figuring this out. Things like the community land trust being established to make sure that we have some places in neighborhoods that are rapidly increasing in value where affordable housing can be built. I also think Richmond needs to pay a lot of attention to where we're developing affordable housing and make sure that we're developing affordable housing in every community. We need to take a real careful look at boring things like zoning and make sure that we're envisioning a new community that really both economically and racially integrates our region. So yes, gentrification and displacement is a very big concern. I think we need to work on neighborhoods not like hitting a tipping point where we're seeing the rapid transition like we did in the 60s and 70s. So if there are ways to even So there's no easy answer. And if Emily has suggestions, we are all ears.
I'd also want to say that, part of what my job is, or what I see it to be, is outreach in the community, particularly in areas where gentrification is certainly taking place and the change of the neighborhood is really rapidly changing. To talk to homeowners, to help them understand how to protect themselves, because I've heard such horror stories, particularly in my own community, where elderly residents who've been there for years are just bombarded with cards and calls and threats of. I've heard one story where the lady was actually not in foreclosure, but received letters about foreclosure and that her house was in foreclosure, and this company was going to help her, save this home by buying it from her, and it's like, and she didn't have family to help her with it. And I can't remember how I found out, but I can imagine that those things are happening. But I do know they happen because I get cards, I get calls, I get emails, I get texts. I know your house is for sale, or are you ready to sell? And people get, overwhelmed with it, with those, advances. And if my house is in disrepair and I really can't find or afford to do what needs to be done, then yes, I'm going to sell it. And I might sell it at, at a loss, just so that I can get away. So,
Thank you, Regina. Thank you both for your candid conversations around redlining in Richmond and what it's meant for the past and what it means for the future. You can find more information and resources by reaching out to us. Again, our website is homeofva.org. That is it for today's topic, but we will be back on Tuesday at 11:30 again with one more installment of our Fair Housing Town Hall series, where we'll be joined by the Shenandoah LGBTQ Center talking about gender identity and sexual orientation protections in fair housing. So thank you guys for your time today, and I'll see you again on Tuesday.
All right. Take care, guys.